Hi, everyone. I'm Stan Mallow, the paranormal yacker. My guest on today's show is theologian, historian, author, and musician Jim Willis. I'll be speaking with Jim about his book, Hidden History, Ancient Aliens, and the Suppressed Origins of Civilization. Jim Willis, welcome to Paranormal Yacker.
Thank you, Stan. Good to be with you today. Really enjoy it. Looking forward to talking with you.
The title of your book, Jim, states it's about ancient aliens and the origin of civilization, and that is indeed covered in the book. However, its contents go considerably farther than that. It starts with the Big Bang and goes from there far into the future. How did that come about?
I used to be a college professor, and when I was teaching, I found it very easy to slip into the routine. You know, when you teach the same course, and my particular course was on comparative world religions, when you teach the same course sometimes 3, 4, even 5 times a year, it's just easy to kind of put it on automatic pilot. I had great students, don't get me wrong. Nobody takes a course in comparative religion because they have to. They only take it because they want to. So my students were really great. They kept me on my toes. They kept me from just getting into that rut, but I could see how easy it was to happen to that. And frankly, knowledge, it's changing exponentially. There are things that I taught, for instance, 30 years ago, even 20 years ago, that now are totally wrong. And I could see these new ideas trying to percolate to the top, but I could also see a lot of academians just trying to push it under the rug because it was easier to stay with what we knew. And I discovered that there was something that I like to call the conspiracy of silence. And all that means is professors knew about this stuff. I was also at the same time a minister, a pastor of a church. They knew about a lot of this stuff, but it was just easier not to bring it up. It was easier just to keep it under the rug. And of course, the students didn't know any better because they came to the course to learn. So they didn't have nearly the knowledge that the professor did. And I discovered that there is a whole hidden history that we're not talking about, not necessarily because it's a conspiracy, although there is a little bit of that in there, but there is a whole bunch of history that we just aren't studying just because we're lazy. And I'm talking about academians now. We're lazy. We don't want to bring this stuff up. I moved out to the woods here I live in South Carolina, and I moved out here when I retired some 15 years ago. And in the last 15 years, there have been things. Nobody knew about Göbekli Tepe, really, when I moved out here. Nobody knew about Denisovans. Nobody knew about any of that. And as it started to come up, it was kind of just buried because it was too much trouble for the professors who, they really didn't want to go to the trouble, and all that kind of thing. And I just, I felt that this really ought to be studied. So when I started writing Hidden History, my deal with the publisher was that I was just going to cover certain areas. But after a couple of months, I wrote to him and I said, this thing is opened way up. And he said, well, where do you want to begin? And I said, well, let's start with the Big Bang. And he said, well, where do you want to end? And I said, I don't know. Let's talk about possibilities of how the cosmos is going to come to a conclusion, if it ever is. And he said, that's a pretty big book. And I said, well, let's give it a shot. And we did, and he liked it, and Hidden Histories was born.
Hidden History isn't just about alternate views of history like those presented in your previous books. What it really is, Jim, is a survey that covers a lot of different ideas about origins. What prompted you to explore all of those views?
I thought it was really important because of something that happened to me back when I was active in church ministry. I had a good friend who was born 2 months after his father died in a tragic car accident. As a result, he grew up never knowing his father. He knew a lot about his father from secondhand sources. When the family would get together at Thanksgiving and Christmas, they would tell him stories about his father. And as a result, he grew up with this idea of who his father was, but it was all from secondhand sources. Then, many years later, when his mother was getting set to move out of the same house where they had lived all of his life, she couldn't stay there anymore, and he said he would help her move. He went up into the attic, and up there in a trunk that probably hadn't been opened for, years and years, he discovered, much to his surprise, a whole bunch of journals that his father had kept. And as a result, for the first time, he began to read in his father's own words who his father really was. And he said, it felt as though up until this time I realized I just didn't know who I was because I didn't know who who my father was. That was, I thought, so profound. I picture that as a metaphor for the human race. We're wandering around. Who are we? Where did we come from? We just don't know. We've established all these secondhand sources and we've tried to go with them, but we don't know. We've forgotten who our father was. Graham Hancock likes to say that we're a species with amnesia. I think that puts it really well. So we have to get back to the original journals, so to speak. And how do we do that? The old timers didn't keep journals or didn't write. Well, I think there's two kinds of important things to think of when we talk about the real history and the part that we've forgotten. And I like to call it hard science and possibility science. The hard science is all over the world in monuments that we can't explain, in megalithic structures that we can't explain, in enigmatic ideas that anthropologists and archaeologists come up with that we can't explain. The pyramids, all the new discoveries that are taking place over in the East right now, in the Far East right now. It's just amazing. So that's hard science in the sense that we can look at those and realize we're already beginning to say now that our ancestors were not who we were taught when you and I were young. We were taught they were old bumbling Neanderthals, that kind of thing. Well, now it turns out that Neanderthal had a bigger brain than we did. And it turns out that there were many species. The Denisovans were just some and others. That's all what I like to call hard science. But when you look at the other part of science is the possibility of what I call possibility science. And that's that given all of these hints and clues, what is possible? Is it possible, for instance, that we have things like panspermia, the idea that Earth was actually either accidentally or on purpose seeded from somewhere else in the cosmos? Is it possible that there are other intelligences out there? And we like to think, oh, no, it couldn't be. Take the whole idea of, well, in the title of the book, Ancient Aliens. Were there ancient aliens? Well, there are some scientists who say no, and they kind of poo-poo the whole idea because they say they're just too far away. And they like to sometimes talk down at some of us and say, you don't understand how big space is. They couldn't possibly get here. Well, they're making a very big assumption when they say that. The assumption is that we're talking about a civilization that may be a couple of 100 years more advanced than we are. And if that's the case, then probably it would be difficult for them to get here. But what if we're talking about a civilization that's 1,000,000 years more advanced than us, who understands things that we can't even conceive of right now? Not only modes of traveling through the cosmos, but within the cosmos or from different dimensions. And we're just beginning to open this stuff up. And I think we make a big mistake when we say it couldn't be because we don't understand it. We don't have the laws of physics that cover it. So I like to think of not only the hard science, the fact that there is evidence that there was something going on in our past that we have forgotten, and also the idea of possibility science. And that's maybe some of these things can be explained by laws of physics and laws of motion and laws of dimension that we just don't understand yet. That's the possibility science. We make a mistake when we cut that out, I think.
Is there any kind of consensus in the scientific community, Jim, about how the universe began, how life began, or how and when civilization began?
There was a bigger consensus 15 years ago than there is now. And I owe that a lot to not only media and social media and things and the internet, but to shows like yours that open up these questions. You're doing important work. And I really appreciate that because, yeah, the scientific community used to be pretty closed around the idea. There were just two ways that the universe could have begun. There was the Big Bang idea. And the second idea is the quasi or steady state. But in the last 15 years, this has just opened up through string theory and through membrane theory, or what they call brain theory or M theory. So in terms of scientific consensus, I suppose probably the vast majority of those who study such things believe in the idea of the Big Bang and inflation suddenly within a matter of less than a tenth of a second, the universe growing from the size of an infinitesimally small to the universe that begins to see around us. Even within that idea of the Big Bang, it used to be that you couldn't ask the question in a classroom, what came before the Big Bang? You would be talked down to. They would kind of tap you on the head and say, oh, you don't understand. Before the Big Bang, time and space began with the Big Bang. So before the Big Bang there was just nothing. But now scientists are beginning to ask the serious possibility science questions. And that's that, how can you get something out of nothing? And is it possible that this is not the Big Bang, but a Big Bang? And the same thing with civilization, we used to just assume that civilization, as we defined it, was about 6,000, 7,000 years old and began in Sumeria. Now, with the discovery of Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe, and now we're pushed it back twice as far. And now that we've got some other ideas coming in and possibility science is beginning to take over, they're beginning to say, could there have been civilizations not thousands of years ago, but longer than that, millions of years ago, that are now disappeared? Is there any evidence for it? And the more I looked into it, surprisingly, there is. And I find it very kind of inspirational to me that every time we make a new discovery about human history, we always push the dates back. It's always older than we thought. I'm really excited. In one sense, I would love to have another 20, 30 years to live so that I could see what's going to be coming out. But it's getting out there right now. And I chalk it up to the fact that academia can't cover it over anymore. Their students are looking at the internet. They're listening to shows like yours. They're asking pertinent questions. And these just can't be ignored anymore, I don't think.
Where, Jim, in the vast, glorious, beautiful, and mysterious cosmos do we, the humble human species, fit in? What is our place in the universe?
Wow, there is a question. I hope we have another 3 hours. That's a wonderful, wonderful question. Excellent question. I think in one way, it's probably safe to say, where do we fit in? Well, in one way, we're a pretty small cog in a very big machine, and we don't really have any unique place at all. That's one way. That's not particularly the way I look at it, because I've come to understand through a lot of different studies and a lot of different experiences that we are much more than our physical bodies. In terms of our physical bodies, we're a species that has grown into sentience somehow. How did that happen? Nobody knows for sure. And we have grown to be the first species that we know about, at least on planet Earth, that can even ask questions like that. So in one sense, oh, well, we've come a long way, but we're still very small. But on the other hand, if other dimensions are true, and if the basis of reality, which is found in metaphor throughout various world religions, if that is true, that we are somehow more than that, if we are sojourners, if we have somehow become the manifestation of a consciousness that is beyond us, that we can't even really talk about. Some people like to use the word God. I hate to use that word now because it has so much baggage that when I say the word God, people think I'm meaning what they mean when they think of the word God. But I like to use the word source. If we are really emissaries from the source at the center of it all, having taken on physical manifestation, then wow, we are quite a bit larger than that. In a sense, if we come from source and return to source, and source is somehow tied up with consciousness or something very much akin to it, then in a way you might say that we are the creators of all of this. It's a playground. It's a school in which we have come to learn things that we couldn't have learned in any other way. And in that sense, I think we're huge. So that's a much too simplistic answer to a very profound question, but thank you for asking it anyway. I appreciate it.
Sometimes, Jim, you come down pretty hard on established experts, but you seem to back up your claims with specific examples. How did you feel while researching those who went to their graves thinking they were failures, only to be proven correct after it was too late for them to appreciate it?
I felt heartbroken. I really did. I could regale with story after story of different people. Take just one, for instance. Take one of the great physicists who ever lived. His name is Hugh Everett. Hugh Everett was the one who gave us the multiverse. He was the first physicist to talk about the idea of the crazy, wacky quantum idea of the multiverse and constantly expanding and bubble universes and all that kind of thing. Brilliant physicist. And yet when he gave forth his ideas, he was absolutely ridiculed. He was driven out of the field. Hugh Everett couldn't get a job teaching. He couldn't get a job experimenting. He couldn't get any money for projects. Eventually, he had to work for the government, and it's probably a good thing he did, because our whole idea that kept us safe during the Cold War, the idea of mutually assured destruction, was Hugh Everett's invention, which was either wise or terrible invention, but whatever it is, it probably kept us safe for the last 50 years. But at any rate, he he was just thrown out, and he died thinking he was a failure. He died, could have been an alcoholic, and he was just a brilliant man. And now people talk about Hugh Everett as if he was one of the founding fathers, as if, oh yes, Hugh Everett, what a wonderful guy, developed all this. I could go on and on about Warren Moreland, for instance, was an archaeologist, an amateur archaeologist, who discovered what he called the red paint people up in New England and the Maritimes. And he believed that there were people up there who were very sophisticated, seagoing people. He had all of this evidence of not only from boats, but also from the kind of tools you would need if you were going to go out to sea to hunt big fish and big mammals, that kind of thing. And he was just absolutely denied any kind of platform at all. They wouldn't let him even put up a display at the World's Fair. And he died thinking he was a total failure. And now his ideas are accepted regularly. And he's seen to be a genius, but he never reaped any kind of reward, either monetarily or even emotionally, or for his ideas. It's just a shame what we do and the horrible things that people say to each other.
How closely connected is the secular supernatural with religion?
This is another one of those both questions, I think. In some ways, I think they're very closely connected, but often neither wants to acknowledge the other. Let's put it that way. Let me give you just a homey example. A lot of religious people will say, oh, we can't believe in other dimensions. We can't believe in entities coming out to us from other dimensions. That kind of stuff just doesn't happen. And then at Christmas time, they will stand up and they will sing, "Hark the Herald Angels Sing," or "Angels we have seen or heard on high." And they sing about what? They sing about angels who are entities, spiritual entities, stepping out of another dimension that in the Christian church they call heaven, stepping out of another dimension. And they read all about these prophets in the Bible who were visited by entities from another dimension who came to speak to them and give them a message and everything else. And so here they are lauding in songs, standing up and singing songs about entities from other dimensions, and yet saying, on the other hand, oh, we don't believe in such things. It's just a terrible thing. So in that way, I think they're very related, angelic being and demonic beings and all of the rest. Religion and the supernatural, I just don't think you can really separate them that far. It's just a matter of our culture and our language and that kind of thing.
In your opinion, Jim, where do ancient aliens fit in with scientific methodology? Is belief in ancient alien contact scientifically valid?
In a single word, I would say yes, it is. There's all kinds of examples that scientists just don't want to take into effect. They may not be able to find an actual UFO or something like that, or they may not be able to go into past and find a skeleton of an ancient alien. But there are a lot of other examples from different fields that they're just not willing to consider. For instance, the biblical examples that I've already talked about, the mythological examples, the stories that are worldwide, coming from all over the place. And to scientists, they just don't want to study those things. But I think that's ample evidence, and I think it certainly warrants looking into it. And frankly, right now, we're just not doing that. Science is about the scientific method, which is a brilliant, wonderful way to try to get to the bottom of things, establishing your ideas and criteria. But mythology and oral history, you can't put that under a microscope. And so I think that's a mistake to not consider it. I consider that scientific examples. If I'm hearing of a worldwide flood, for instance, from 50, 60, 80 different cultures that have the same story, I've got to say maybe they're talking about something that really happened.
I find it interesting, Jim, that you point out that so-called objectivity is claimed by many different professional fields, ranging from academia to religion. Do scientists have denominations and sects like religionists? Is there any real difference between how the two operate?
That's another great question. You have, on the one hand, both scientists and religionists are going to say, no, we're completely different from each other, separate. And yet I've discovered, having been involved in both now for more than 50 years, I discovered that not only do religionists and religions have denominations or different ways of looking at things and saying it's our way or the highway. You know, you're either a Methodist or a Baptist, you're a Christian or you're a Jew, you're Jewish or you're Muslim or whatever. And even within all of those groups, there's different sects, that's SECTS, of Muslims, and there's different kinds of Jews, there's different denominations of Christians, and they all seem to say the same thing. Get a bunch of like-minded people together together, form a group, and be sound in doctrine and dogma. I know a lot of scientists who would love to say, oh, we never do that, but they do. They do it too. There's all kinds of scientific denominations. The greatest example here in America, for instance, is there's a scientific denomination called Clovis First. These are the scientists who really believe that the Clovis generation, and I could go into the whole thing, but I know our time is done, but the first people in America were called Clovis people because one of their spear points was found in Clovis, New Mexico, and it was about 16, at the most 12, 16,000 years ago. And they believe their denomination, their scientific denomination, says they were the first ones in America. But meanwhile, there's other denominations who say, no, we have information now from people being here in America maybe 50,000 years ago, maybe 130,000 years ago. And the denominations of science, they won't speak to each other. They just don't believe it. And I think it's a shame, but that's the way it is.
You, Jim, pointed out earlier in the interview that when new discoveries are announced, they always seem to push the dates for our species and our evolution backward in time. How old do you think the human race really is? Have there been civilizations in the ancient past far earlier than is now believed?
I don't know how old we are as a human race, but I do know we're a lot older than we tend to think we are. And the reason I say that is not just because it's my opinion, but because literally every single anthropological study has always pushed things backwards into the past. And I think we're a lot older. As for other civilizations that have existed in the past, I almost have to think, yes, in 5 billion years of the Earth's existence, and including the billions of years that the Earth could have supported life of some kind, I just think we're making a huge mistake to think that it didn't arrive before. We may be the first, but I think there were other civilizations before us. In terms of our own human civilizations, yeah, I think so too. I think there was a civilization, fairly complex civilization, that existed during the last ice age, the Younger Dryas. And the reason I say that is because as soon as the Younger Dryas period ended and the glaciers melted and we began to expand into the new territories that were now ours, we built huge monuments like Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe. The Sphinx in Egypt, for instance, is a lot older than we think it is. Now, did these people all of a sudden just wake up one day and said, oh, I think we'll start moving megaton boulders all over the thing? No, I don't think so. I don't think they invented it. I think they inherited the knowledge from a previous civilization that is now lost to us. But I don't think that's hard to explain. You say, well, where's the evidence? Well, there's the evidence right there in the fact that these great megaliths spread up almost overnight. I think it's fantastic. And I think we're doing a great disservice to ourselves when we say we just aren't that old and we're brand new and we're at the cutting edge. Oh, I don't even think we've come close to seeing the cutting edge. And besides that, who is to say that our civilization is going to last? I mean, look around the world right now. We're at a pretty precarious place. And it could be that we are the next lost civilization. I can easily see us destroying ourselves. And then 10,000 years from now or 12,000 years from now, the descendants of the survivors who don't know anything about us start to wonder and study our civilization and begin to say, was there a civilization back in the 21st century? That kind of thing. Who knows? I just keep going back to this. I know I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I think when we close our minds to those things, we are really doing ourselves a disservice.
In your opinion, Jim, where are we headed as a species?
Enlightenment or death? I think we're going to go one way or the other. If we don't wake up and realize that we're playing with toys that are pretty serious and we don't have the maturity, we don't have the moral compass, we don't have the ethical background yet to handle some of the things we're playing with. We are the first civilization in our history that has the opportunity to actually destroy life on planet Earth as we know it, not only through nuclear confrontations, but through environmental destruction, through, all kinds of ways. We could become the next Atlantis, so to speak. What did Plato tell us about Atlantis? He said that, well, they gave vent to human hubris and they destroyed themselves because they bit off more than they can chew. And I think that's a great metaphor, whether you believe in a literal version of Atlantis or not. The spiritual metaphor is really important. We can destroy ourselves. And the only thing that'll stop it, and the thing that could stop it overnight, as a matter of fact, without any new laws or without any new ideas, is simply if we grow up if we enlighten ourselves to what is really important. And if we don't do that, I think our civilization hangs in the balance. I think we're that close. Sometimes I'm very apprehensive. Sometimes I'm very encouraged. But it's a great, we're at a crossroads. There's no doubt about it.
Who, Jim, do you feel was and is responsible for suppressing the truth about our origins, and what is their reason for doing so?
I just don't know. I think there's probably a cabal somewhere that is trying to do that for some reason, although I wouldn't be surprised if there was. I think it's just a matter of, as a species, and as sometimes even as scholars, we are incredibly naive and we are so compartmentalized. We all get ourselves into a narrow frame of being where we study one narrow field. To get a doctorate nowadays, you have to write a peer-reviewed paper that passes muster in your particular field, and it has to be a paper about which nobody has ever written anything before. In other words, it has to be completely new ways of explaining things. As a result, the fields are getting narrower and narrower. We used to say in school that if we keep studying more and more about less and less, the time will soon come when we'll know everything about nothing. And I think we're approaching that time. I don't think we need specialists. I think we need broad categories. And once you're a specialist and known for being a specialist in a particular field, you don't want to venture out of your category. As a result, there's a lot of knowledge out there that just goes right over your head. You say, well, it doesn't apply to me. Well, it does, because pretty soon, like a jigsaw puzzle, all these pieces have to start fit together. We know a lot, but we have to start putting the pieces together. So when you say who was responsible for this, I think probably in a sense we all are. It's just so easy for us to get into our little niche and surround ourselves with the kind of people who believe everything that we do and talk the way we do and separate ourselves. You only have to look at what politics in this country is like, for instance, right now. Our country is getting divided more and more, again, from left and right, liberal and conservative. Same things going on in the field of religion. Same things going on in the field of academia. And if we don't get together and start talking to each other instead of at each other, we're in serious trouble. So in one sense, I think the answer to your question is, I don't really know, but in another sense, I can say, well, maybe it's all of us are to blame somehow.
Should viewers of Paranormal Yacker want to buy Hidden History, Ancient Aliens, and the Suppressed Origins of Civilization, and also learn about the many other books you've written, how can they do that?
The easiest way is just to go to my website, jimwillis.net. That has all the books and reviews, and you can click on them and it'll take you right to Amazon, or in some cases to the publisher. That's probably the easiest way, but I really encourage people to go to the website for two other reasons too. First of all, on the website, you can get links to my Facebook page and to my YouTube page, which people might be interested in. Probably the most important reason is on the website, there's a contact page. You and I can talk to each other and see each other through the miracle of the internet and computers, but we don't know who's listening. And I like to get in touch with people who are actually listening. I like to hear from them. So there's a contact page, and people can go to that contact page and send me an email. As of now, at least, I'm still answering every single person who writes in. I try to answer them personally because it's really important. We are a group of people that I think is much larger than we think we are. There are more people asking the kind of questions that you asked today than we like to think, but they're there. The more we come in contact with each other and the more we dialogue with each other, I think the better off we are. So it's jimwillis.net. Look forward to hearing from you.
Perfect. Jim Willis, I thank you for being my guest on Paranormal Yacker. It has been a pleasure yakking with you.
Thank you, Stan. Appreciate it. Always good to talk with you.
Hi, everyone. This is Stan Mallow, the Paranormal Yacker. I hope you enjoyed the interview you just watched. To be sure you're amongst the first to receive new interviews when they're released and to have access to previous ones, subscribe to my free YouTube channel. To do that, all you have to do is press the subscribe button on your screen.